Absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it gets bizarrely specific. We're talking about the kind of power that lets you ban the word intellectual, rename bread after your mother, and declare a national holiday for melons. This isn't a collection of evil plots. It's a tour of 33 of the most profoundly weird and dumb rules that real dictators actually forced on millions of people. 1. The Ugandan dictator Idi Amin was a man of many titles, most of them self-awarded. While he famously called himself the conqueror of the British Empire, his strangest obsession was with a small rainy nation in the north of Great Britain. Captivated by the idea of Scottish independence, Amin simply decided to help them out by declaring himself their king. Yes, you heard that right. He officially added King of Scotland to his long list of titles. This wasn't just a quiet thought. He announced it to the world, presumably expecting a call from Edinburgh any day. You have to appreciate the sheer audacity of a Ugandan general, appointing himself ruler of a country he had no claim to, all while its people were completely unaware they were even in the market for a new monarch. 2. Saparmurat Niyazov, the lifelong president of Turkmenistan, built a cult of personality so vast it's hard to believe it was real. But among his many bizarre decrees, perhaps the sweetest was his love for melons. He didn't just enjoy them. He considered the local muskmelon a divine gift and a pinnacle of his nation's achievement. So, naturally, he declared the second Sunday of August a national public holiday, Melon Day. He wrote odes to the fruit, praising its heavenly taste. This wasn't just an excuse for a picnic. It was a massive state-sponsored festival with concerts and dances, all dedicated to celebrating a gourd. While his people were deprived of basic freedoms, at least they had an annual, mandatory party thrown in honor of a piece of fruit. 3. Imelda Marcos, the notoriously extravagant First Lady of the Philippines, was a master of appearances. When high-profile events like a papal visit or the Miss Universe pageant were scheduled, she faced a public relations problem: the vast slums that foreign guests would inevitably see on their way from the airport. Her solution was pure, cynical genius. Instead of, helping the people, she commanded the impoverished residents to paint their rusty, corrugated tin roofs in bright, cheerful colors like red and green. The logic was that from a distance, or from a helicopter, the sprawling shantytown would resemble a magnificent blossoming flower garden. It was a perfect metaphor for the regime, covering up deep-rooted problems with a cheap, colorful, and utterly superficial coat of paint. 4. If you're going to build a cult of personality, why stop at statues and portraits? Saparmurat Niyazov took it a step further and decided to conquer the very concept of time. In 2002, he decided the Gregorian calendar was simply not good enough and completely overhauled it to be more him. January was renamed Turkmenbashi, his official title meaning leader of all Turkmen. April was renamed Gurban Sultan, after his mother. September became Runama, after his own pseudo-spiritual book, which was already mandatory reading in every school. He didn't stop there, even changing the names of the days of the week. Imagine having to fill out a form or celebrate your birthday on a date that is literally named after your dictator's mom. It was total control, down to the very words you used to describe your day. 5. On top of being a linguist and a calendar reformer, Niyazov also fancied himself a dental expert. During a public speech, he expressed his distaste for the gold teeth that were popular among the youth of Turkmenistan. Rather than just letting people live their lives, he banned gold crowns entirely. But he didn't stop at the ban. He also offered some free medical advice. The people, he declared, should follow the example of their ancestors and gnaw on animal bones to strengthen their teeth and keep them pearly white. He seriously suggested, with a straight face, that the key to good oral hygiene was to behave like a dog. It was a policy that was not only intrusive, but also profoundly, bafflingly stupid. 6. Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic for over 30 years, was not a man known for his humility. He nurtured a god complex so immense that he wanted it institutionalized across the entire country. In one of his most audacious moves, He forced every single church, regardless of denomination, to display a prominent sign, often in glowing neon letters that read, Dios en el cielo, Trujillo en la tierra. This translates to God in heaven, Trujillo on earth. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a mandatory addition to their holy spaces. It placed him as God's co-pilot, the terrestrial manager of all affairs. Forcing a place of worship to essentially advertise your own divine importance is a level of megalomania that is truly in a league of its own. 7. Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire was a pioneer in using television for propaganda, and his method was anything but subtle. He decreed that the nightly evening news on the state-run channel could not simply start. No, it had to begin with a divine spectacle. Every single evening, viewers were treated to an opening sequence that showed Mobutu's face, looking wise and benevolent, slowly descending from a sky full of fluffy white clouds. This celestial vision was accompanied by the sound of an angelic choir singing his praises. It transformed the act of watching the news from a mundane activity into a nightly ritual of worship. Before you could learn about the weather, you had to witness your leader literally descending from the heavens. 8. In the late 1950s, Mao Zedong launched the Four Pests campaign to eradicate what he saw as the enemies of Chinese prosperity: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and bizarrely, sparrows. Mao's reasoning was that sparrows ate grain, which rightfully belonged to the people. What followed was a nationwide war on birds. Millions of citizens were mobilized to bang pots, pans, and drums relentlessly, making so much noise that the terrified sparrows couldn't land. They would fly until they fell from the sky, dead from exhaustion. The campaign was a resounding success. The sparrow population was nearly wiped out. There was just one tiny problem they overlooked. Sparrows also eat insects. With no natural predators left, locust populations exploded, swarming across the country and devouring crops on an unimaginable scale. This genius plan directly contributed to the Great Chinese Famine, a catastrophe that led to the deaths of tens of millions of people. 9. Saddam Hussein was a man who understood the power of an image, and his own was defined by that thick, iconic mustache. It was his signature look. But while he proudly cultivated his own facial hair, he was deeply suspicious of anyone else's. He issued a strict military decree that forbade any soldier or officer in the Iraqi army from growing a beard. The official reasoning was that beards were associated with religious piety and conservative Islamic movements, which he saw as a direct threat to his secular Ba'athist regime. So, in Saddam's Iraq, a mustache screamed state-approved strongman, while a beard screamed potential religious extremist. It was a bizarre, government-mandated grooming standard where your choice of facial hair could literally mark you as a potential enemy of the state. 10. In the isolated and fiercely nationalistic nation of Myanmar, the ruling military junta had a very specific idea of beauty. They saw the influx of Western cosmetics, lipstick, foundation, mascara, not as tools of self-expression, but as a form of cultural invasion. To combat this, they periodically banned the import of foreign makeup, aggressively promoting a single, state-approved alternative, Thanica. This is a traditional, yellowish-white paste made from ground bark, which has been used by Burmese women for centuries. For the regime, it was the only correct way for a woman to care for her skin. It was a policy that turned the simple act of putting on makeup into a political statement, pitting traditional purity against so-called foreign corruption. 11. Saparmurat Niyazov makes his third appearance on our list, this time for his war on man's best friend. In 2004, the Turkmen dictator apparently took a stroll through his gleaming, marble-clad capital city of Ashgabat and was displeased by what he saw and, more importantly, smelled. He declared that the city's stray dogs had an unpleasant odor and were unsightly. His solution was as simple as it was brutal. He ordered all dogs to be rounded up and exiled from the capital. Just like that, an entire species was declared persona non grata within the city limits simply because the president didn't like their smell. There was no talk of shelters or adoption programs. They were just gone. It's a chilling reminder that in a dictatorship, even the existence of animals depends on the whims of one man. 12. In the 1970s, Zaire's Mobutu Sese Seko launched a radical national campaign called Authenticity. The goal was to purge the country of all lingering colonial influences, and he started with people's names. He decreed that all citizens had to drop their Christian or European names and adopt authentic African ones. Mobutu himself led by example, changing his name from Joseph Désiré Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko Kukungbendu Waza Banga. But he didn't stop there. He also banned the necktie, a staple of Western business attire, contemptuously referring to it as the noose of the colonizers. The irony, of course, was that while he forced this austere vision of African purity on his people, he was busy embezzling billions and living a life of unimaginable European-style luxury. 13. While Lee Kuan Yew is often credited with transforming Singapore into a first-world metropolis, his methods were famously authoritarian. And nothing captures his obsession with order and cleanliness quite like his legendary war on chewing gum. In 1992, after years of complaining about vandals using gum to jam the sensors on subway doors, he implemented a complete and total ban. You couldn't buy it, you couldn't sell it, and you certainly couldn't import it. For years, Singapore was a gum-free dystopia. While the rule was slightly relaxed later for therapeutic dental gums, the message was clear. In Lee Kuan Yew's Singapore, social order and pristine pavements were infinitely more important than your right to freshen your breath. It was the ultimate example of using a sledgehammer to crack a very sticky nut. 14. When the Khmer Rouge seized power in Cambodia in 1975, their goal was to reset society to year zero. This meant erasing history, culture, family, and even individuality. This terrifying philosophy extended to the smallest details of life, including how it was recorded. The regime effectively banned color photography. All official portraits, especially the haunting mugshots of the millions destined for the killing fields, had to be taken in stark black and white. For the Khmer Rouge, color represented a richness and diversity that had no place in their new, brutally ascetic agrarian society. Banning it from photographs was a way of literally draining the life and vibrancy out of the world, creating a visual record that was as bleak and colorless as their ideology. 15. Benito Mussolini was obsessed with the idea of Roman glory and Italian purity, and that extended to the language itself. He launched a fanatical campaign to purge the Italian language of all foreign words, which he believed were polluting its noble character. This linguistic cleansing resulted in some truly absurd changes. Common words like cocktail were replaced with the awkward Italian invention polybibita. But the most ridiculous front in this war was culture. American cartoons were seen as a threat, so Mickey Mouse was officially renamed Topolino, and Donald Duck became Paparino. Even Goofy was rebranded as Peepo. It was a perfect display of fascist priorities. While the world was heading towards a global war, Il Duce was busy making sure cartoon mice had patriotic, Italian-sounding names. 16. Of all the dictators on this list, Francisco Matías Nguema of Equatorial Guinea was perhaps the most purely insane. His reign of terror in the 1970s was marked by paranoia and unbelievable brutality. He developed a deep, pathological hatred for educated people, seeing them as a threat to his absolute power. He didn't just persecute them, he declared a literal war on knowledge itself. In a move that sounds like something from a dystopian novel, he officially banned the word intellectual from being used in the country. This wasn't just a quirky rule, it was a death sentence. Following the ban, he launched a campaign of mass murder, systematically executing thousands of citizens who had any form of higher education until the country was almost entirely illiterate, leaving only him as the great thinker. 17. For most island nations, the sea represents freedom, trade, and opportunity. But for the Castro regime in Cuba, it represents one thing above all else: an escape route. To prevent citizens from fleeing the communist paradise, the government has maintained an iron grip on maritime access for decades. Owning a private boat capable of making the journey to another country is practically impossible for an ordinary Cuban. The state controls nearly all vessels, and unauthorized sailing is treated as a serious crime. This has turned the beautiful Caribbean waters surrounding Cuba into a kind of liquid prison wall. It's a surreal reality where people live on an island, but are forbidden from truly accessing the open ocean, a constant reminder that their movements are controlled, even by water. 18. When Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia in 1975, they didn't just want to reform the country, they wanted to erase it and start over from scratch. Pol Pot declared the beginning of Year Zero, a concept so radical it's hard to comprehend. In an instant, the entire history of Cambodia was deemed irrelevant. The regime abolished money, making the entire population work as unpaid agricultural laborers. They outlawed all religion, blowing up temples and executing monks. Private property ceased to exist, and families were forcibly separated, with children taught that the state was their only true parent. It was an attempt to completely annihilate human culture and memory, transforming a nation of millions into a blank slate upon which Pol Pot could build his horrific agrarian utopia. 19. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was obsessed with increasing his country's population, believing a larger workforce would fuel his grandiose industrial ambitions. To achieve this, he implemented a series of brutally repressive policies under Decree 770, which outlawed contraception and abortion. But he didn't stop there. He introduced a specific, punitive celibacy tax. Any man or woman, married or single, who remained childless after the age of 25, was forced to pay a special tax, which could be up to 10% of their income. It was a monthly fine for failing to reproduce for the state. Women were subjected to regular, humiliating gynecological examinations at their workplaces to monitor pregnancies and prevent any attempts at abortion. It was a terrifying system that turned the most personal decision of a person's life into a state-mandated, taxable duty. 20. Turkmenistan's Saparmurat Niyazov, who we've already established had some unique ideas about public policy, decided the country's healthcare system was inefficient. His solution was, in a word, insane. In 2005, he ordered the closure of all hospitals outside the capital city of Ashgabat. All of them. His reasoning was that if people were truly sick, they could simply make the journey to the capital, where the best facilities were located. This single decree left hundreds of thousands of people in rural areas, many of them elderly and poor, without any access to basic medical care. It was a move of such breathtaking arrogance and disregard for human life that it's hard to fathom, treating an entire nation's health as a logistical inconvenience that could be solved by centralization. 21. The cult of personality surrounding Niyazov was so all-encompassing that it began to seep into the very fabric of the Turkmen language. We've already seen him rename months after himself and his mother, but he took it one step further with something far more fundamental. In 2006, the Turkmen government, at his direction, decided to change the word for bread. The staple food of the nation, known as chorek, was officially renamed Gurban Sultan, in honor of his late mother, Gurban Sultan Ece. Think about that. Every time someone went to a market to buy a loaf of bread, they had to ask for a Gurban Sultan. It was a level of Orwellian control that forced citizens to utter the name of his mother for the most basic necessity of life, ensuring that no one could ever forget who was in charge, even while eating. 22. François Duvalier, the brutal dictator of Haiti known as Papa Doc, was a man steeped in voodoo superstition and paranoia. His reign was a bizarre mix of political terror and occult beliefs. One of the most infamous, though perhaps apocryphal, stories about him concerns his supposed war on black dogs. According to legend, Papa Doc believed one of his political rivals had transformed himself into a black dog to avoid capture. Taking no chances, he allegedly ordered his feared secret police, the Tonton Macoute, to round up and kill every single black dog in the entire country. While concrete proof is scarce, The story perfectly captures the essence of his rule. A regime so consumed by paranoia and magical thinking that even the nation's pets weren't safe from its violent whims. 23. Paraguayan dictator Alfredo Stroessner ruled for 35 years, creating a regime built on a foundation of systemic, state-sanctioned corruption. But unlike others who tried to hide their graft, Stroessner embraced it and turned it into a system. He openly allowed his military officers and government officials to engage in smuggling, bribery, and embezzlement. There was just one simple rule: they had to give him a cut. This unofficial corruption tax made him personally one of the wealthiest men in the world. It was a brilliant, evil system. By making everyone in power a criminal, he ensured their absolute loyalty, as their own freedom and fortune depended entirely on his continued rule. He didn't just tolerate corruption, he institutionalized it as the central pillar of his power. 24. Francisco Solano Lopez, the 19th century dictator of Paraguay, was a man who demanded respect, and he was willing to kill for it. He was obsessed with the pomp and ceremony of European monarchies and sought to replicate it in his own country. He issued a decree that required every single citizen, without exception, to show him the utmost deference. Whenever his carriage passed by, all men were required to remove their hats and bow deeply. Women had to curtsy. This wasn't just a matter of etiquette, it was a matter of life and death. His guards were instructed to watch the crowds, and anyone who failed to perform the greeting with sufficient enthusiasm could be beaten, arrested, or even executed on the spot. It was a law that turned every public appearance into a terrifying performance of loyalty. 25. For authoritarian regimes, controlling the flow of information is just as important as controlling the military. In places like Cuba and North Korea, the governments have long understood that a satellite dish is more than just a piece of equipment. It's a window to another world. That's why private ownership of a satellite antenna is a serious crime in these countries. Having one allows citizens to bypass state-controlled television and access international news, entertainment, and ideas that directly contradict the official government narrative. Finding a hidden dish can lead to imprisonment and accusations of being a foreign spy. It's a law that highlights the fundamental paranoia of these regimes. They are so terrified of their own people hearing a different story that they are willing to outlaw a piece of technology. 26. Enver Hoxha's rule over Albania was one of the most isolationist and repressive in modern history. He sought to create the world's first truly atheist state, and he pursued this goal with ruthless fanaticism. In 1967, he officially banned all religion. Churches and mosques were demolished, repurposed into warehouses or sports halls, or simply left to decay. Priests and imams were executed or sent to brutal labor camps. But the ban extended into every home. Celebrating any religious holiday, be it Christmas, Easter, or Ramadan, was strictly forbidden and considered an act of anti-state subversion. If you were caught with a Christmas tree or fasting for Ramadan, you could face a long prison sentence. It was a complete and total war on faith, an attempt to erase thousands of years of culture and belief from the national consciousness. 27. While much of the world sees Halloween as a harmless night of costumes and candy, for the Cuban government, it's something far more sinister. For decades, the state has officially discouraged and sometimes actively suppressed the celebration of Halloween, viewing it as a prime example of cultural imperialism and ideological diversionism from the United States. State-run media often portrays the holiday as a decadent foreign tradition that has no place in a socialist society. While small, private celebrations may occur, any large public gathering would be seen as a provocative political act. In a country where the government dictates so much of daily life, even the act of a child dressing up as a ghost can be interpreted as a betrayal of revolutionary principles. 28. In North Korea, surveillance isn't just something the state does. It's a duty forced upon the citizens themselves. The entire population is organized into a system called Inminban, or people's groups. Each Inman band consists of about 20 to 40 families who live in the same apartment building or village. The group has a state-appointed leader who is responsible for monitoring every single member. They keep track of visitors, report suspicious activities, and hold regular meetings for self-criticism sessions. This system effectively turns neighbors into spies for the regime. Everyone is watching everyone else all the time. It's a brutally effective tool of social control that fosters an atmosphere of constant paranoia and ensures that even the smallest sign of dissent is immediately reported to the authorities. 29. In many Eastern Bloc countries during the Cold War, the state's obsession with controlling information extended to something as seemingly neutral as the weather. Only the official state meteorological service was permitted to create and publish weather forecasts. Private individuals or independent groups were strictly forbidden from making their own predictions. The reasoning was rooted in pure paranoia. A non-sanctioned forecast that predicted a bad harvest or severe weather could be seen as an attempt to undermine public confidence in the state's competence or, even worse, to intentionally sow panic and unrest among the population. So, in these regimes, even predicting rain was a political act that could land you in serious trouble if you weren't on the government's payroll. 30. Greek dictator Theodoros Pangalos, who briefly seized power in the mid-1920s, was a man with very strong opinions on public morality, particularly when it came to women's fashion. He was scandalized by the shorter hemlines that had become popular in the Roaring Twenties. In an effort to enforce his own puritanical standards, he issued a decree that made it illegal for women to wear skirts that ended more than 30 centimeters, about 12 inches, from the ground. Police were literally tasked with stopping women in the street with measuring tapes to ensure their attire complied with the law. Violators could be fined or arrested. It was a bizarre and intrusive law that turned police officers into fashion critics and women's bodies into a matter of state regulation. 31. Under the long and deeply conservative dictatorship of Francisco Franco in Spain, society was governed by a strict patriarchal code rooted in traditionalist Catholic values. Women's freedoms were severely curtailed, and their role was seen as being exclusively in the home. This ideology was reflected in an unwritten but powerfully enforced social rule that amounted to a curfew for women. It was considered highly improper and suspicious for a woman to be out in public after dark without the accompaniment of a male relative, typically her husband, father, or brother. While not a formal law in most cases, this social expectation was so strong that police could and would stop and question lone women, effectively making their independent movement at night a risky and potentially shameful act. 32. The Franco regime's obsession with policing women's bodies was on full display at the nation's beaches. As the bikini started to gain popularity across Europe in the 1950s and 60s, the Spanish government saw it as a symbol of foreign decadence and moral decay. The wearing of bikinis on public beaches was strictly forbidden. Special police patrols, sometimes called the morality police, were tasked with enforcing decency standards. They would patrol the sands, on the lookout for overly revealing swimwear on both men and women. A two-piece swimsuit was out of the question, and even one-piece suits could be deemed too risque. This turned a relaxing day at the beach into a potentially stressful event where your choice of swimwear could lead to a fine or public shaming. 33. Dictators love elections. Not because they believe in democracy, but because they love the illusion of it. In many authoritarian regimes, like Iraq under Saddam Hussein, voting was not just a right, it was mandatory. Failure to show up at the polls could result in severe consequences, including being marked as a disloyal citizen. But the absurdity didn't stop there. When voters entered the booth, they were often presented with a ballot that had only one name on it. Your choice was to vote yes, or risk the consequences of voting no, or spoiling the ballot, an act that was considered treasonous. This charade consistently produced unbelievable results, with leaders like Saddam winning re-election with 99.9%, or even a perfect 100% of the vote. It was a terrifying form of political theater, forcing an entire nation to participate in a lie and choose their own oppressor. We've just scratched the surface of historical absurdity, because the rabbit hole of dictator madness is bottomless. We know for a fact we've missed some truly insane ones. So, the challenge is this. What is the one baffling, unbelievable rule from history that we completely failed to mention here? Go to the comments and educate the rest of us. And if this journey into weirdness was worth your time, prove it with a like and subscribe for more.